He told me, that's how we learn. Like, supposed to author as myself, not reflecting in writing. They like honestly, they never heard about like back then. Now it's
Perfect.
people self authors as a self back then.
All right. Thank you all for being here. I am so excited on a personal level for this keynote. But I also think I can speak in a way that is representative of the entire Millennium editorial team in saying that we are grateful you're here. And it is an honor for this journal to host this conversation. I will very briefly introduce Amal and the talk, and after her lecture, we'll have time for a group discussion. So please collect your questions and comments for that. Dr. Amal Abu-Bakare is a lecturer in the politics of race and decolonial studies at the University of Liverpool. She received her PhD in international politics from Aberystwyth University. As a Saudi-born Nigerian dual citizen of Canada and the United Kingdom, she is interested in all things international, particularly food and politics. Her current research profile remains centered on using anti-colonial IR theory to explore how North American and European political and security institutions continue to empower racially configured exclusions and terror. As you were preparing your submissions, you may have noticed one of Amal's pieces in our call for papers, her 2022 essay, Your Work is Not International Relations. As I was particularly interested in the ways that disciplinary boundaries are policed and the character of the standards to which knowledge is held in order to think about contesting these epistemological power structures, her work presented a particularly insightful critique of the way these power dynamics play out in practice. Whose knowledge is local and context specific, and who can partake in generalizations, universalizations, and grand theory? Who can abstract themselves into a purely intellectual being, and who is trapped in particularities, practicalities, and materiality? I think this is a particularly important conversation to have in the context of an academic journal, and particularly a journal like Millennium, if we want to do genuinely critical work that has any kind of political importance. As Amal points out, these are also particularly important questions to interrogate if we employ categories like international or work in a journal that publishes theory. This is our task of the hour and to some extent of the entire symposium. So without further ado, Amal, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is okay. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much to the editors, Elsa Bengtson, Mueller, Taylor Borowitz, and Rhiannon M. For inviting me. And thank you all for attending. I'm incredibly nervous. This is my first keynote. But I hope my contributions today will provide some helpful trajectories of thought relative to the symposium's theme of after international relations, beyond critique, building the new in the shell of the old. Great title, by the way. I don't know who came up with it, but really, really wonderful. What I intend to do today is start by discussing the origins of my reflection piece, Your Work is Not International Relations, and the challenges around its publication within an academic journal. This is, of course, intimately tied to the symposium's concern of disciplinarity, which I intend to speak to as well. I discuss disciplinarity for those who haven't read it by using my firsthand experience with scholastic gatekeeping as a window for others to understand the structural dilemmas that early career researchers like me continue to face despite the many moves towards progress that our discipline has worked towards since the late 20th century. I want to set the stage for both lived experience and academic conversation to meet so that those who do not know me well are able to better understand how I and those like me see the issue of disciplinarity and its challenges. This is because I feel, and this may be quite bold of me, that my experience represent the experiences of many others who generally do not get the opportunity to be, let's be honest, professionally vent their frustrations on such a powerful platform while being heard by some of the most thought-provoking political intellectuals in the IR community, especially those in this room. Being gathered in a room before an audience that represents one of the top international politics journals in the world is an immense privilege that I intend to utilize to my advantage while I can. I'll also be speaking about what I regard to be an underlying theme of my articles thus far, which is understanding the possibilities for a reparative scholarship in studies of international affairs. Most of this comes from my effort to adopt a post-colonial praxis, meaning my process of putting theory into action process which for me centers heuristic devices that sensitize readers to the multiple contending and overlapping effects of colonial and imperial rule and how these inform our contemporary understandings and afterlives in international politics and security. This is where I discussed my concerns with the arguments of considering whether we are in a post-IR moment and whether the capacity of such themes holds any transformative power for an international relations that centers the agency of members and diasporas of the global majority. So, regarding the origins of your work is not international relations. So this was an eight-page reflection piece published in 2022 in Alternatives on gatekeeping and IR knowledge production and the politics that go into presenting national and racial contestations as issues unworthy of international study and consideration. I didn't feel they were unworthy. Premised on my personal experience of scholastic rejection, this commentary is intended to be reflective intervention concerning the state of the field and the what I regarded to be the imperial connotations of methodological disciplinarity. I define this as the process in which IR research is restricted within disciplinary borders because of scholastic endeavors to keep the discipline pure. Here, using anti-imperial thought, I press for deeper consideration and reevaluation of how academics come to decide which experiences of the world should be deemed worthy of global recognition and where the boundaries of IR should come to an end. As part of my reflection, I endeavored to investigate the scholastic process of connecting disciplinary boundaries to real political lines, and I suggested that this reveals a problem of how academics are pursuing a monopoly over understandings of the international. In my view, at that time and still now, academics are treating IR's porous, semi-arbitrary boundaries as though they define political issues that traverse them. As a form of study, IR is interdisciplinary in its reach, so I was concerned with people who wanted to turn the interdisciplinary into what I regarded as a false disciplinarity. Some have described this attempt at monopoly as a form of methodological disciplinary, and I think that's come up throughout the conversations we've been having today. In this process, IR gatekeepers come to reject IR's existence as interdisciplinary, being focused on metaphorically manning the academic watchtower, whether it's through subject matter, methods, epistemologies. I argue that being busy policing what is and what is not a global issue, these same intellectuals likely will miss key opportunities for innovative knowledge production concerning the international. As Anika Olsen correctly observes, we need to challenge the bodies and borders of literature if we are ever to truly understand the structural nature of inequities in knowledge sharing in international studies. So, on the topic of how this reflection piece was received by the academic community, the positive and constructive feedback I received from what was then Twitter and emails was wonderful. I'm honored to know that scholars who had been part of my own IR education, like Roland Bleeker and Laura J. Shepard, have referenced my reflection piece in their writings. I was and I still am incredibly overjoyed that textbooks cited my reflection piece. So one which stands out to me is Thinking World Politics Otherwise, which was recently edited by Rose Criley, Nivi Manchanda, Laura again, Kai Wilkinson, Caitlin Bidoff, and Stephanie Fischel. On the reason I'm so excited about this particular reference is that it's the first time that my research was allocated to mainstream IR section of the textbook. I was actually looking for it in the textbook and I couldn't find it. And my friend was like, oh, it's not in the race section. It's actually at the beginning. And I had people texting me, congratulating me on being declared mainstream by IR. I'm aware that the politics of determining the mainstream is a serious discussion, often to be clear, epistemic violence, and of course that deserves serious consideration that we should talk about as well, possibly during the Q&A. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge some of the less constructive, although I'm sure well-meaning dialogue that followed my reflection piece's publication. I can show the slide now, if that's all right. An example included some academics framing my reflection piece as though it were essentially a clapback towards overly harsh academic criticisms. Some writing it was a declaration of war against reviewer number 2. So I actually copy and pasted and I removed the person who did the tweet because I wanted to give them anonymity. And then I saw some great articles that were already existent, by the way, unrelated to my paper, but just reiterating some of the points. So it was a mentor of mine who had to first explain to me what the comment reviewer number 2 meant when used as satire. I found this to be incredibly funny because most people assume that millennials like me are quick to be aware of social media trends and satire, and I was very much unaware and out of touch with academic memes. It took a different kind of humor that I did not then appreciate to understand the tweet that I have behind me from an academic joking about the popularity of my new published reflection piece. How my friend explained it to me was that the reviewer number 2 typically represents the phenomenon that is the harshest and most critical reviewer among an article's peer review process. According to the meme, which I also have behind me, reviewer number 2 is presumed to be angry and bitter, exacting revenge on their peers through overly critical anonymous rejections of papers they secretly wish they could have written. They are also presumed to sadly not like puppies. This meme encourages us to not be like reviewer number 2. In her blog piece on this scholastic marvel, let's call it, pointedly titled "Don't Be Reviewer Number 2," Professor of International Relations Laura Schoberg writes that saying the phrase, quote, the phrase "don't be reviewer number 2" is more complicated than "don't be an asshole," of course. But a lot of it is that. Sometimes I tell people I know who do not work in academia about how academics behave towards each other, especially in anonymous situations, and they don't believe me. They wonder how people who are otherwise intelligent can say and or do such appalling things, end quote. In the case of my reflection piece, your work is not international relations, I don't believe that this was a situation that completely mirrored the reviewer number 2 joke. I want to be clear that I have the utmost respect for the editors whom I quoted and critiqued as part of this reflection. Their comments to me were not anonymous, but the motivation for my criticism of their perspectives on my research was primarily an appraisal of IR as a discipline, where I wanted to use my rejection from an IR journal as a stencil. Writing about and publishing a rejection from an academic journal is a bold move. Back then, I was a bolder person who felt that I needed to take my power back because back then I was tired of feeling powerlessness about my circumstances when writing in a field that I was and remain to this day quite passionate about. I also wrote my reflection piece because I wanted what was then a desk rejection to mean something. I wanted to connect with others about something I saw in IR that I wasn't sure that others could see. Back in August 2021, when I first contacted the then editor-in-chief of Alternatives, Edil Otzig, I was a fresh academic, only having defended in November 2020 from my dining table at home because I completed my viva during a global pandemic. Like many of us trying to figure out our place in higher education at that time, the adjectives I would use to describe myself then were sequestered, albeit in beautiful Aberystwyth, Wales, so I was very fortunate in many respects. Scared of the then state of the world and what the future would look like for all of us living through an unprecedented event, and ultimately what I would call a rookie in the field. Despite having success with a previous state of the field piece on counterterrorism and race, I felt like I was a rookie in how I still found writing for a global academic audience to be incredibly challenging. And because of the then debates about decolonizing the university, writing anything that had to do with racialized experiences and contesting knowledge production felt terrifying. Like stoking the flames of an already very turbulent situation. Many of us tend to think fondly of the decolonizing higher education moments of 2015 through 2020 and the important conversations these years of scholastic and public debate encouraged in our disciplinary settings, conferences, and classrooms. However, for those like me who are not established academics yet at this time, fresh PhD candidates had concerns about being blacklisted for certain job opportunities or being typecast as woke, difficult, unmanageable, particularly if we had completed PhDs in post-colonialism or critical race theory. My PhD, of course, had both, and the topic condemning state institutions' complicity in anti-Muslim racism, another hot topic that gets many of us in trouble even right now. And even now, I'm still slowly and overcautiously trying to write a book on these controversial topics, even though I'm very anxious about what the consequences of publishing such a book might be. Then and now, I wanted and want to be seen as an IR scholar, regardless of the emotional, physical, and psychological labor that went into being recognized by my peers amid such a difficult political climate, because I understand that being recognized as an IR intellectual holds immense power for anyone concerned with addressing actions and challenges of politics which transcend national boundaries. Since being an undergrad in 2011, an undergrad who was taught by Professor Wayne Cox at Queen's University in Canada, to see Edward Said's Orientalism as a seminal IR text, I had strongly identified with an ethos which maintained that power was not just about who had the most weaponry or democracy, but instead about who held political control over the reality of the racialized person. I still hold on to this ethos today. Many of us want to be seen as IR academics outwardly to policymakers and the public, because having recognized expertise in this area gets us a seat at the table of power in real world settings. It adds a base to our voice when we speak about important international issues, from security to transnational protest and humanitarian responsibilities. This reality, however unjust and unfair, gives us who are typically without power the power to help us advocate on behalf of those we desire to empower, humanize, and to call upon the world to cherish. This is a power to speak on life and death and to challenge the truths of academia that contribute to dehumanization by virtue of people with my adjacent politics existing in spaces of power. With studies of race and racism in IR, the very purpose of adopting an analytical approach is to offer what Remy Joseph Salisbury has best described as a corrective to how theoretical approaches are often too ignorant of how race and racism organize investigations. As they identify, due to the history of international politics being intertwined with ideologies, institutions, and leaders who justified colonial administration, racial hierarchy, and violence, and how we order and prioritize life and death at the international level. As late as the 1960s, it was normal and acceptable to pursue studies of global affairs in a manner that relegated discussions of race to the realm of the private, domestic, or unusual discussions of political life. As I continue to argue, categorizing racial epistemes as non-IR only serves the purpose of demonstrating how IR intellect is still codified as epistemologically white, and how analyses of race and racism are still not seen as collective issues that echo beyond national borders, despite reflecting the present and after lives of the global majority. Rejections of conversations of race as matters of international study demonstrate how conventional and critical interpreters of what constitutes IR still do not intuitively grant race agency, despite such concepts being integral to the discipline. For me, this is not a matter of interdisciplinarity. This is a matter of how, within IR, race thinking operates as a structure of thought, dividing the discipline and the world between what is deserving and undeserving of scholastic attentiveness, and between what is and what is not transparently human circumstance in politics. In consideration of the conversations that we've been having today, I agree that true analytical reflexivity in IR academia calls for the dismantling of disciplinary gates. It asks, in my view, for those who want to pursue this objective, those who interpret the knowledge of IR as IR, who benefits the most from what we do as academics? Who benefits the most from academics accounting for the systems which allow IR to be experts, particularly to be privileged knowers? Scholars like Eamon Yang remind readers of IR that location is a place of innovation in the discipline. Location is where theoretical analysis starts and dictates more than a passing engagement with the life worlds of subjects. Reconsidering her words, it is in the fact the very life worlds of subjects themselves, rather than that of states, that we're able to see and promote a less reductive picture of the making of the international. The life worlds of political subjects should therefore function as a potential space in which alternative readings of the international might be articulated. I am not sure dismantling the disciplinary gates is the same as broaching a post-IR after the conversations we've been having today. I'm aware that the interventions which have exposed the racial, Eurocentric, and colonial dimensions of existing academic practices, have long highlighted that the structural factors that have prevented and continue to prevent an equitable representation of people of color, queer communities, indigenous peoples, and non-equitable representation of Western worlds and key academic institutions as part of this. I agree with scholars like Roland Bleecker that to forget the constraining boundaries of academic disciplines is to better engage with the big questions of the day in ways that manage to reach as many scholars, practitioners, and most importantly, in my view, everyday people as possible. I think that we have a responsibility to speak back to our disciplinary scholars who still operate by convention and endeavor to convince them of the need to see the key dilemmas in the global politics in a new, creative ways. But I am concerned that using the language of post entails another set of intellectual sentiments that I'm a bit anxious about. My concerns with developing a post-IR. So for those who have read my work or those who have not, I'm admittedly skeptical of using post-structuralism as a trajectory for critiquing the issue of disciplinarity. Although I'm open to discussions of where different IR communities can come together. As I've written elsewhere, when critical and post-structural theorists maintain the ontological and epistemological assumptions of, for example, representational logic in their critiques of international politics, imagination, and knowledge structures, I think they're trying to do a good thing. Most often, they often seek to do something productive for the oppressed. They are perhaps seeking to return agency to subjects and people operating within social frameworks by bringing light to how systemizing discursive principles operate and wield great power in the context of European philosophy. Excuse me. However, the problem still lies with how these are some of the critical critiques that generally lead to discussions of oppression in a post-human terrain, where theorizing about security no longer occurs to cultivate human beings, but instead focuses on interrogating the essence of being human. So Jenna A. Hanchi has amazing comments in her 2018 article titled Toward a Relational Politics of Representation. Sorry. Where she writes, when the fundamental issue for post-structuralists and critical theorists addressing international politics becomes not how the essence of a human being is defined, but that it is defined as the representation of an essence at all. The problem is that the substance of being human is intellectualized in a manner that reflects only a small, privileged segment of humanity. The liberal subjects theorized from posthumanism are possible only in relation to overstressing lives residing in colonized geographies. Yet this fact of reality is often disavowed or overlooked by even the best intentioned post-structural and critical theorists. Inspired by her, what I'm trying to say is that theorizing while positing an abstract liberalized human subject or IR project without contesting, let alone naming, the system of institutions, practices, and norms that prevent the liberalization of most humans as part of the same disciplinary project prevents us from effectively thinking through what it means to be human as an uneven relational politic. It also prevents post-structural and critical theorizing from moving past the human, and as I would argue, the discipline in a manner that truly challenges the racial and colonial processes central to any reimagining of the discipline of IR's formation. Another quote that she says that I think is really important to consider is that, quote, when we absent bodies from discussions of theory, we implicitly ground our theory in somatic norms and tacitly accept their conditions, whiteness and coloniality, end quote. I am not of the opinion that we have appropriately disrupted these conditions yet in our field. And with the global rise of fascism, white nationalism, and continuing direct and indirect occurrences of systemic violence in the Caribbean, the United States, England, and of course with the genocides in Sudan, Democratic of Congo, in Gaza, in Ukraine, I am not certain that we should be looking beyond the discipline right now. This is not a priority for me. What is a priority for me is understanding how I can use the little authoritative power and privilege I have and being seen as an IR figure to pursue justice at my local, national, and international levels. What I can do by wielding a pen, by sitting at the front of the classroom or in an ivory tower, by being backed by a Russell Group a Russell Group name for however long this privilege lasts, is to testify for IR's legacy as an institution of colonial administration. So that was meant to be posed as a question. What can I do? I'm curious about those who say they wish to depart from this discipline and their reasoning. If to be of this discipline is to have control over the production of discourse, or if it is to belong to an immensely powerful type of institution among a wider set of knowledge complexes, whether it be think tanks, government agencies, etc., why would someone with this power want to relinquish it? If being post-IR means engaging, quote, in transdisciplinarity, the state of being parallel towards established disciplinary methods, theories, and paradigms are at odds with one or more of the established disciplines. One of the readings you recommended, Olaf Corey, Taylor, Olaf Corey asked whether a strategy concerned with clearing the decks precisely due to entrenched biases is a necessary risk to consider. My answer is I'm not sure. I agree with Olaf's description of critical scholars often being too busy with unveiling epistemologies of ignorance and exclusions. I also agree with his harsh assessment. Excuse me. I also agree with his somewhat harsh assessment that critical scholars too often don't realize that their tools of deconstruction are infected by racialized dispossession, violence, and discrimination, or the privileging of another coterie of white Eurocentric thinkers like Derrida and Foucault. So if we are to burn down IR, I'm not sure it is IR intellectuals as we have come to know them that should be holding the torch or leading the way. As I have written elsewhere, though, while the discipline of international relations is grounded in a history excuse me, I keep having to cough. As I've written elsewhere, though, while the discipline of international relations is grounded in a history inherently defined by white-centric colonial administration, I believe that the art of looking and thinking and inquiring about the world around you is an epistemic project that has always belonged to everyone. This is why I believe that discipline should be made open and accessible to everyone in the intellectual, social, and economic and bureaucratic capacities. Everyone should have access to the power we have. Regardless of the conundrums of our disciplinary status, discipline has power. A power that people are right now actively reaching for to raise awareness of the human rights abuses, ecological eradication, collective action, cultural genocide, mass murder, and immediate crises. Yet they can't be heard by policymakers, by government administrations, by law enforcement, by national and international media outlets in the way that we can. In her infamous speech, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House," Audre Lorde posed an important question. She asked, what does it mean when the tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? She answered that it means that only the narrowest parameters of change are possible and allowable. This was said at an academic feminist conference honoring the 30th anniversary of the publication of Du Bois' The Second Sex. In this speech, Audre Lorde articulated the frustrations of racialized queer women being treated as tokens, with herself being the sole Black lesbian speaker invited to participate in predominantly white movement. There are analogies that can be made here. We had an interesting moment in 2025 with all the grievances occurring across the globe, where as academics of IR, perhaps we could reassess our tools and new aims for what IR scholarship is meant to be about. If we think about George Lawson and Robbie Shilliam's comment back in 2010, where they said that IR appears as a kind of disciplinary polo mint, an enterprise without a center. I think a potential productive talking point for us could be a query around what goals should center IRs in times of crisis. If we see ourselves in a moment of interdisciplinarity and reflection of needing to reassess our priorities rather than our boundaries, maybe we can have conversations that are more reparative and less academic centric before discussing abolition. Maybe reparative IR scholarship can be the new IR turn. On the question of what does reparative scholarship look like in studies of international affairs, I am one academic voicing one informed opinion of many academics, but for myself, what currently feels worthwhile in IR academia is pursuing reparative justice against the injustices of North American and European political security institutions, particularly in the area of racially configured exclusions and terror. In this context, this has meant remaking the epistemological foundation of present-day policy approaches to resolving political violence, recommitting the academic and policymaker attention to understanding how and why people find significance in revolutionary and anti-colonial contexts. What I'm offering is not a new idea, but what might be innovative for some is that the center of my polo mint is one of radical care. The phenomenological experience of being made aware that a marginalized person's dehumanization matters not just individually, but also collectively. Authors like Amini Young, Samdeep Sen, Jasmine K. Ghani, Rabia Khan, Sarah Grabe Saif, Robbie Shilliam, and Olivia Rudiziba, and many others have been writing tirelessly to recenter IR in this direction, centering the axiom that to exist is to be loved, or to be allowed to come into political recognition or existence, to be granted intellectual generosity, or to be interpreted via one's own language and existence rather than another's, is all to be made transparently human in IR again. Returning power back to racial and marginalized others is the endeavor of this kind of IR academia, and I'm proud to be witnessing this type of IR writing, whether it is representative of the discipline, a field, or a meeting place. Our work may not be international relations, but it has some sort of international responsibility. And while it does not offer abolitionist possibilities within its current frames of reference, what IR can do is consider its potential for being in the service of humanity in a way that is more sensitive, less self-serving, and authentically hospitable to systems of knowing, which house or more at least equitably validate the different imaginations by which disenfranchised people continue to live politics. To conclude this keynote, I want us to think more about what Homi K. Bhabha's famous words that preface Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. There, Bhabha writes, quote, "It is our very generosity that is being challenged. Such a beautiful, melodious word means only one thing, status granted. For the new men on the other side who have been set free, nobody has the power or the privilege to deny anybody anything. And the day when our human race has finally matured, it will not define itself as the sum of the inhabitants of the globe, but as the infinite unity of the reciprocities," end quote. And this spirit, regarding the meaning this quote holds for IR academics, in my view, I think these turbulent times show us that it is ultimately our capacity for both intellectual and tangible generosity that is being presently challenged. I believe how our academics respond to our international responsibilities. This is what will ultimately test our maturity as a discipline, as will the outcome of the infinite unity of our reciprocities, if we can agree that reciprocity towards these communities and knowledge systems that IR has traditionally marginalized is possibly a reparative way forward. Thank you for your time.
All right, here we have